Hello! For whatever reason, after not having made a solo video in a really long time, I found this really overwhelming. This also was not the video that I meant to film. I'm gonna try to get back to romance content really soon. But I have been watching this true crime series for a while, and they just did a season that happened to be related to a murder that I just read in book form, and I have got to talk about it because my brain is like exploding. So the documentary series in question is called Wild Crime. This is a true crime series currently in its 4th season from Hulu. Now, every season of this show focuses for about 4 episodes on a different murder or set of murders. The thing that connects them all is that they all happen in national parks. That's why it's called Wild Crime. And we are going to be focusing specifically on the 4th season, the one that just came out on Hulu, that has a subtitle of 11 Skulls. The book that we are relating this documentary to came out in 2019, and so the book again is a few years older than the TV show, but it is called American Predator: The Hunt for the Most Meticulous Serial Killer of the 21st Century by Maureen Callahan. Maureen Callahan is the author of the book and is very heavily featured in the TV show. So while they, may not be like a one-to-one based on, they're very, very heavily connected with the author of the book, being heavily involved in the series, many of the people in the series being the people that talk to her in the book. And the differences, though, are a big deal. And we're going to talk about it. So before I get into the specifics, I just want to kind of talk about, the book and the documentary kind of as solo objects. So the book is what I read first. I read it this summer, back in August. And it was one of those just like random audiobook things for me. I had been reading a lot of history, I'd been reading a lot of political science, and I just wanted something a little bit different. I saw the subtitle of this, The Most Meticulous Serial Killer of the 21st Century, and the name Israel Keyes was a name that I had never heard before. Now at this point, I've watched a lot of true crime, and I was surprised to hear Most Meticulous Serial Killer of the 21st Century, and then to have this be someone whose crimes I absolutely didn't know about. So I checked the book out and I listened to it on audiobook. Maureen Callahan's writing is incredible. It was like hard to stop listening. I wanted to know what was going to happen. I was very invested in the story. It's well written, it's engaging. And the only thing, if there is like a negative to this book, is how it ends, but that's not Maureen Callahan's fault. This story has an incredibly abrupt ending, and it's really not satisfying for anybody involved. Both the book and the documentary approach the telling of the story in the same way. They begin with the abduction of a teenage girl in Alaska whose name is Samantha Koenig, and the resulting investigation into what has happened to her. This is eventually revealed to be a murder, not an abduction. Samantha is unfortunately deceased, but through a rather odd series of mistakes, they do eventually connect her stolen bank card to a man named Israel Keyes. He is from Alaska, but he has otherwise never shown up in this investigation. And so they arrest him, actually in Texas. They bring him back to Alaska and they start to question him. And eventually they discover that not only is Israel Keyes responsible for Samantha's death, but he is also responsible for a death of, at that time, an unknown number of other people. He will eventually admit to the death of 2 other people, a couple from Vermont. And the reason that the subtitle of the documentary is 11 Skulls is that while he is incarcerated, Israel Keyes will draw on paper, and what he uses to draw this is blood from his own finger, the skulls of 11 people plus a pentagram and a Satan head, basically saying, we are one. So they are assuming because he has drawn these 11 skulls plus a representation of himself as Satan, that he has 11 victims out there. In the investigation, which again is kind of, you know, the book and the documentary now expand, they talk about Israel's background and how the investigators use the interviews that they have with him, because he is interviewed extensively, to try to figure out some of his other victims. Because the book and the documentary follow such a similar trajectory, in some ways, right, if you like mapped out the major plot points of like the disappearance of Samantha, figuring out what happened to Samantha, catching Israel, going into Israel's background, and then going forward and like trying to find out with the investigators like how many other people he's hurt. It's genuinely shocking to me, things that are included in the book that are not included in the documentary, that I think are actually really important to how that later investigation plays out. And I would like to know, quite frankly, why it's not in the documentary, if there are political reasons, if things about this have changed, because I am genuinely flummoxed. And when my fiance came and he was watching the last 2 episodes of this 4-episode documentary with me, I was editorializing as people were talking, because I was like, I don't know why they're not mentioning this, but this is a thing that happened. Because I remembered these points so clearly from the book, even though I watched the documentary in December and I read the book in August. So once the police in Alaska and the FBI, who've been brought in to assist them, kind of realize what they have with Israel Keyes, they are pretty quick to realize that he has other victims and that they need to get these names out of him. So one of the immediate things that happens is this weird thing in the interrogation where Israel admits to killing Samantha because he assumes that the police have looked in his shed at his house, which is where he killed her and where there are still elements of her DNA and such and such. Israel has admitted to killing Samantha in that shed before the police, for whatever reason, despite having, you know, done the search of the house, looked in the shed. So Keyes is very upset by that. He is essentially copped to a murder that, had he not pointed them to the shed, who knows why they hadn't gone in there originally, but there actually would not have been any proof of that. So there's like some weird slip-ups even in the beginning here. But Keyes, you know, assuming maybe too much, gives them this information. He begins then to describe how he dealt with Samantha's body and points them basically exactly to the point of a lake where he had gone out on the ice and submerged her body. Through more conversation with Keyes, it's clear that he idolizes other serial killers and wanted to be one, and he admits that he killed this couple in Vermont and tries to tell them exactly where the body is and what happened. And at this point, the people in Alaska realize that they have a very serious serial killer who has committed crimes probably all over the United States. He talks about going to places in different states and burying what he calls kill kits, which is like everything he needs to commit a crime. So if he happens to be traveling through that area and wants to do something, he can just dig up this, like, it's basically like a survival kit, but for crime, and go and do that. So he's just like very, very, very well thought out criminal here. When the people in Alaska realize what they have on them, for whatever reason, the federal prosecutor, or one of the prosecutors, insinuates himself into the interviews that the police are doing with Keyes and the FBI are doing with Keyes. This is not normal. Interrogations and interviews are done by law enforcement. The transcripts of those are then turned over to prosecutors so that they can make their case. The prosecutor is not supposed to be in the interview room. They're not supposed to be there legally, and they're not trained to be there. But this is what happens because people realize that this Israel Keyes thing is going to be pretty big news. And this one dude in particular really, really wants a piece of that. Because he tries to take over the interview, he launches himself into the interview room. He completely undercuts the relationship that the police have been forming with Keyes. And he also just completely rampages over the different interrogation and interview techniques that the police officers and FBI are trained in, but he is not. And there's a lot of issues where Keyes then realizes that he can manipulate the situation to his advantage. And they probably don't get out of him what they could have if this guy had let the FBI and the police do their job. The interference of this prosecutor is nowhere in the documentary, nor is the fact that it was Keyes who told them about the shed and not the fact that the police found it. So those two details immediately not there. This colors, I think, how they talk about the attempt to get more information out of Keyes as this goes on. Keyes is basically saying that in order for him to give them more information about his victims, he wants to be provided the death penalty as fast as possible because he wants this to be over with. And they keep kind of like playing with him on that, and also like it's not really like up to the police or the FBI to like just say, yes, you can have the death penalty, right? That's like a legal thing. And so Keyes is like losing faith in the police to give him what he wants. And if they can't give him what he wants, why should he talk to them at all? And he also becomes very frustrated when he gives them all this information on the couple that he's killed in Vermont, and they're unable to find the couple's bodies because the abandoned house in which he killed them has been demolished and everything that was there was like brought to a landfill. This was a number of years ago. And so there's just definitely some police and, interrogation issues. Again, not necessarily by the police, but by this like entanglement of people trying to like be the big man in the room with Keyes. That probably leads us to not knowing as much as we could have about his other victims. And that is a problem for the families, obviously, who there are these victims that may have been killed by Keyes, that they're able to put some pieces together, but they can never get him to admit to it. The abrupt ending of both the documentary and the book, hope you don't think this is a spoiler, but is that Keyes commits suicide in prison, and so anything that he did know goes with him. And I think that adds to the frustration of the issues during his interviews and interrogations, because they probably could have been able to get more from him, but they didn't. And again, that whole bit is left out of the documentary. What is in the documentary, obviously, is the very powerful uses of video and audio that the book cannot provide. There was very close-up security footage of when Samantha Koenig was abducted from the coffee shop in which they worked. There is audio and visuals from the interviews with Israel Keyes. In particular, he has an absolute Joker-like laugh that just haunted me afterward. And then if you go back to those 11 skulls as pictures that he made with his own blood while he was in prison, you actually see those in the documentary, and they're only just described in the book. And obviously seeing that is just very visually just like, whoa. So again, there are a lot of reasons to watch the documentary for those reasons, but this is something in which I feel like you really don't get the full story from the documentary. And honestly, I really liked the Wild Crime series. I will definitely continue to watch it. I think it's very well done. But after seeing how different this series is, or not different, but what it left out from the book that I read by Callahan, it does make me question it a little bit. And like, why was these particular plot points left out, right? So this is why I think when I do these videos, I almost always say you should definitely read the book, because it just adds way more context to the documentary. But in this specific case, I feel like there was some very, very integral things to how this case progressed or did not progress that is very important. And I think it becomes honestly even more sad when in the documentary you get more up close and personal to potential victims of keys and their surviving family members or friends who talk about being unable to have closure because they can't confirm either. Sometimes they don't even have a body. In most cases, actually, they don't have a body, and they can't confirm that keys did or did not cause their loved one's demise. So it just makes it sadder that there wasn't more information that was gotten out of Keys before he took his own life. Okay, well, this was definitely, again, not the content that I planned for today, but I just really had to talk about this because it has been just driving me a little bit batty, like trying to explain why I had so many issues between the book and the documentary on this. But it's definitely a very interesting story that I think more people should know about. Because there are still potentially a number of victims that have not been identified, and people may or may not have information that is like helpful for law enforcement. But also I feel like the part of the book that's not in the documentary is also important because ego got in the way of justice, and that is not helpful for anyone. And I think we should talk about that. So thank you for listening to me being a true crime junkie instead of a romance junkie again. Hopefully I'll have more romance content coming up for you guys. But either way, I'll see you for our last reading roundtable of the year that will be coming out next week. I'll see you guys then. Bye!